I would go in there and I would see people that hang their license there, but they're sitting at their desk and they're literally killing time. They're the only two things that make you money in sales are prospecting and presenting. And and that could mean prospecting out emails, prospecting phone calls, out networking, and then getting in front of a buyer, showing them property, or getting and doing a listing presentation. But the only two things that are IPA are those things that are prospecting and presenting. And we say that you should have 70% of your day be IPA.
Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast, the podcast designed to encourage, empower, and educate you, the real estate professional around the world. Our esteemed guest today is a gentleman by the name of Gary Michels. Gary and I became familiar with each other, a decade ago, because Gary co-founded a company called Southwestern Consulting. He co-founded that company back in 2006. Gary is a keynote speaker, a sales trainer, and a business consultant. On top of all of that, he's the author of 2 books. You'll hear that in our interview. Gary is a wealth of knowledge. He's a dynamic speaker. He's super enthusiastic. And I am so excited to share this content with you today. Gary's going to talk about sales, and he's going to talk about some of the things that salespeople do that are big mistakes in forgetting what truly is at the essence, at the root of sales. Also some things that we all need to just remember that we're doing on a daily basis. He also talks about some hardship that he's experienced. He talks about the journey of becoming a speaker and an author, which for a lot of top producers, you're getting tapped on the shoulder by maybe the board of realtors in your local association and or your state association or national association of realtors to speak in front of others because you've been there and done that. Gary will give you some practical wisdom today on the podcast. So I'm so excited to share what might be slightly different. You know, Gary he has been there and done that. He was in real estate. He was married to someone who is a real estate practitioner, and he was a husband-wife team in real estate before he got into the consulting gig. And so Gary is a wealth of information. I can't wait to share this information with you. If you love our podcast, we would be honored to have a 5-star review on Apple iTunes. We would love to have a subscribe on YouTube or iTunes. And for all of my guests, that just gives us life. It gives Kayla Davis, my podcast producer, life. And it just helps us know that we're mattering to you. You know, sometimes it's looked at as validation or a shameless plug, but I'll tell you, for the folks that spend time and energy putting these types of things together, it is important to us to know that it's mattering in your life. So, and if you're not wanting to do that in a public venue, please send us an email to info@calibrate.re.com. All right, so without further ado, here's Gary Michels of Southwestern Consulting. Designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is Calibrate Real Estate. My esteemed guest today is a pal, Gary Michels from Southwestern Consulting. Now, a little bit about Gary. Gary is the co-founder of Southwestern Consulting. He is a keynote speaker, he's a motivational speaker, and he's a sales trainer and business consultant. Gary's got a really cool history with the Southwestern companies, and there's several sister companies within it. I'll let Gary share some of those details. But my experience with Southwestern Consulting and the Southwestern parent company is that they train ninja salespeople, and Gary is going to teach you really how to sell. If you haven't ever had a class in sales, they are masters at that craft. And he's also going to make sure that if you are someone that's trained in sales, that you're doing it in such a way that your client feels dignity and that you're serving them through the process and not feeling slimy about the sales process. So Gary, thank you for being a part of the podcast, and welcome.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you.
All right, so let's go back a handful of years to your start. You know, and reading your bio and also having seen you speak in person, and it's been about 10 years since I've seen you speak, but I have worn out this CD of mine where you talk about all of the different things that you like to do with your trainees in that talk, Turn It Up a Notch. So I know a bit about you, but I'd love for the folks that are listening in to hear how you got your start with Southwestern as a college student and selling for Southwestern Advantage door to door, which is a lot of people think that that's crazy. And I have a lot of friends that have done that. So let's talk about that. And then also as your experience of working with a fundraising company in the Southwestern parent company.
Yeah, so my dad's always been a hard worker, and still is today. He's 78 years old and retired at 65. I spoke at his retirement, and then he's still working as a professor at Santa Clara University. So, and he's done it with balance though in his life of being, a person that travels and does family time, but just always been a hard worker. And Dad had a belief that, he had to pay his own way through college. So therefore, his children should do the same. And so back in the day, I went to UC Santa Barbara. He offered $1,500 a year for college. So you can imagine, college was about $25,000 between tuition costs and housing costs. And so I had always worked 2 jobs. I worked at TGI Fridays and Domino's Pizza. And I worked at 14 years old at Woolworths and actually didn't tell the truth and said I was 16 until I turned 16. And then I left there, but he said, oh, I already knew you were underage. So when
Woolworths, that's a blast from the past. I love that.
I know.
All the time.
And it was my first job. So I actually delivered newspapers as a kid. But anyways, I saw this ad in the school newspaper in college and it said earn $5,000 in the summertime and you'll get to see a different part of the country. And I didn't know what that involves. So I went to this meeting at this church, and the next thing I knew, I had made a commitment to go work for Southwestern, work 80 hours a week, go live in a different part of the country where I wouldn't know where I'd be living and I wouldn't know how much money I would be making. And I had to then tell my parents that I'm not coming home that summer to do 2 jobs. And of course, Dad was like, cool, hardworking, Dad, come on, but Mom was a little worried that, she didn't know where I'd live. And I was very blessed. My first summer, I was able to, the average student made about $5,000. I was able to go out and really learn the business. You go out to Nashville for a week of training and made a little over $30,000 in my first summer, and in 3 summers made $105,000. So I was a rich kid on campus, never had college loans, but really learned the value of hard work, studying hard. If you can sell anything door to door, right? And in a 20-minute period of time, be able to get in somebody's door, connect with them at their kitchen table, a lot like what you do at real estate, is connect with people in their homes. And be able to walk out with a deposit of $200-300 for some books that you're not even going to give them at that point. You're going to give them the books at the end of the summer is truly a sale. And I think mentally it gave me a lot of confidence, and still does today, to that if I can sell something door to door, I can do anything. And about 60% of our employees at Southwestern Consulting happen to have sold books. We don't make it a requirement, but like you said, they're ninjas. they're very good, and it was a great time. And then so after I sold books, I got an opportunity to go work for a school fundraising company called Great American Opportunities, and I'd always been kind of a ham. I played guitar. I was in theater. Always been kind of a person that liked to get in front of people, and also loved kids. And enjoyed working in the schools. I would mentor some kids. I was a big brother and big brothers, big sisters. So when I got to here, I got to go help high school, elementary school, middle school, and college kids do fundraisers to raise money. It was great. And I was the youngest person. This is really interesting. I was the youngest person in my sales school class, and everybody kind of whispered, Gary, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to make it. You're too young. And I was a top in my sales school class. When I left the company 19 years later, only one other person was left. I was #1 salesperson 11 out of the 19 years I was there, out of 500 and some people. So when someone tells Gary, someone tells me that you're not going to be successful, like, bring it on, baby, bring it on. So yeah, those were my 2 kind of big careers, although I also did real estate, and that's how you and I connected to and know that I know a bit about real estate, I had a time at the end of my career with Great American that I wanted to go start motivational speaking and sales training consultancy. And my wife at the time was a realtor. And so I was around real estate quite a bit. And I got my license and was doing real estate. It was kind of a secondary thing for me because we were doing it as a husband and wife team. And she knew all the contract stuff, but I knew everything else. And it worked well, and we sold quite a few homes. And I still believe my relationship with realtors and title folks and people in the mortgage industry is a little special because I'm not just a trainer, but I did it and know what they go through.
I think that's really important, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. It's such an interesting, almost dichotomy, if you will, or it's counterintuitive. You get a lot of sales trainers, you get a lot of professional consultants that have never been in the real estate industry trying to work with realtors. And I work with a lot of real estate professionals across the US. And then obviously this platform gives me an opportunity to communicate even more. And the real estate industry, I think, is very particular about who communicates to them, because it's a different business. And when you're working in someone's home, when you're kneecap to kneecap with them at their kitchen table, trying to figure out how to handle their largest investment in many cases, their home, and how that works, it's a very different business. But at the same time, it is still sales, and there are still tactics that you can utilize. And this isn't trickery, this isn't sleight of hand, but there's just good tactics, good best practices that you're going to unpack for us here. And I think it's just great that you've been in our seat. You've walked a mile in our shoes. And I think that that's really important. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to share your story with our podcast audience. So I know Southwestern Consulting is great at sales training, and the Southwestern Companies, which has several sister companies under it, is just known for sales. You know, what are some of the
leadership.
Obviously,
so it started as sales, but you know, it's interesting. There are roughly, and it changes through the Bureau of Statistics and Labor, about 60 to 65 million people that say they're in sales in the country right now. And I believe that everybody's in sales, and that number is probably a lot more because their title doesn't say sales, there's pretty much sales in every component. Yet there's less than 30 colleges in the United States currently that you can get a major in sales, and there's less than 100 colleges that you can get an accredited course in sales. And so you're absolutely right. When our company first started in 2006, there really wasn't a place for someone to go truly learn how to be in sales. I'm very familiar with a lot of the real estate coaching companies because I went through them. I went through Brian Buffini, I went through Mike Ferry. They're all very fine. And the interesting thing is that you can learn, and it doesn't matter if it's real estate, title, it could be insurance, whatever. You can learn all the technical aspects of whatever industry you're in. But if you can't sell and you can't properly, share what's good about your company, the value of your company, how to overcome objections, how to properly qualify, how to present and really bring value to people, you are never going to reach the potential that you can reach. And but my very first client was a real estate client. When we started our company, it was Intero Real Estate. It's the company I had done business with, and they liked my work. And 7 real estate offices hired me, and I've done a ton, and our company's done a ton since then, where we'll do monthly trainings for real estate offices by webinar or in person to kind of supplement and augment what they're currently doing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And real estate has been part of the foundation of Southwestern Consulting. I've been a client, and I have several friends here in Denver that are very successful realtors and real estate investors that have been a part of the Southwestern company, whether it's Southwestern Advantage and or any of the sister companies. So you guys have real estate in your blood, and leadership is a component of whether you're in sales or in leadership, however you want to look at it. You know, it intersects for our audience. And so one thing that I really enjoyed about hearing some of your history is that I've had an opportunity to meet several of the people that you started your company with and have grown the company with. A handful of years ago, I was at an elite retreat that Southwestern hosted in Nashville, Tennessee. And Gary, I want to make sure that the people who listen to him selling and making $30,000 of commissions in one summer, I wish that Gary was the anomaly, because then you could say, oh gosh, Gary, just knocked it out of the park. Actually are in a situation where they made $100,000 in a summer. And it's just incredible what you're able to do for college students, and to be able to do that without debt, to be able to go through college and have the ability to make more than someone could make in a year in just 8 to 12 weeks is just incredible. So I've got to imagine that as a leadership and motivational speaker and as a trainer, you've probably distilled down some really tactical mistakes that salespeople or sales professionals, as I like to say, make. And so I'd love to talk about some of those things that you see on an ongoing basis and things you teach about.
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is salespeople, on the whole, are not good listeners. Okay. There's that expression, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And that's because we're supposed to listen twice as much as we talk. And there's something I teach all the time, and that is that when they're talking, they're buying. So as a professional salesperson, you want to be cognizant to the idea of asking questions and listening to what people are saying. I think a big mistake salespeople also make is they do not properly qualify people. And it's interesting because when I've written a couple books, and when I did my research for my first book, Getting In and Getting Out, I wanted to see, what kind of sales books were out there and what were the common topics. And the whole book was about what do top producers do that average producers don't do. And I was a top producer, top out of 500 people, but I'm just one person's opinion, right? Like what if we were to ask lots of number one producers, what are the common characteristics that they're doing? And even if you never wanted to be a number one producer, like if you did what the top producers are doing, the gap would be smaller at the very least. You know what I mean? And so sure enough, I had an idea of writing a letter to 100 CEOs, presidents, VPs of sales of different companies, and asking if I could spend a day with their top producer. And 21 of those 100 allowed me to actually go on the road. And I literally, that movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is what I did for a couple months. And I had 21 companies I did this with, and I found 84 similar characteristics of top producers that they did that average producers didn't do. And one of them is they had mastered the idea of qualification. And they'd understood that you do not go into a presentation until you've built a rapport and you've properly qualified people. And you know their need, and you know if they're working with any other companies and what they've done in the past, and all the different areas of, like, you're teeing them up. You can't provide a remedy until you know what's happening. So I definitely think that if you're listening out there, that do not make the mistake of not being good at qualification. Don't be just an order taker. Really dig in. A couple others, and then if there's anything you want to add, because I'm sure you have a ton of mistakes you've seen over the years from realtors and people, is income producing activities is a concept we talk about all the time. IPA. It's not a beer. It is a beer, but it's not a beer when I'm talking about it. And income producing activities are the only two of them for salespeople is prospecting and presenting. And I saw this when I was in the real estate office, and I would go in there and I would see people that hang their license there, but they're sitting at their desk and they're literally killing time. They're the only two things that make you money in sales are prospecting and presenting. And and that could mean prospecting out emails, prospecting phone calls, out networking, and then getting in front of a buyer and showing them property, or getting and doing a listing presentation. But the only two things that are IPA are those things that are prospecting and presenting. And we say that you should have 70% of your day be IPA, and 30% of your day could be doing the $5 and $10 an hour jobs that you want to make $100 an hour and $200 an hour. And that's a big, like, if people could hop through the phone right now and I could look you in the eye, I would say, man, if you just measure your IPA, because if you don't inspect, don't expect. and that's all you didn't work on your closes and your rejections and your referrals and your qualification and your technique, but we just worked on that, your business would go up. So those are, I mean, I can go on and on with mistakes, but those are probably the three biggest.
I think that's great because I think that it keeps it simple for people, which is important. And as realtors, as you know this, we love to think in threes, 3% commission, three simple things to remember. So I love the three concepts there. The IPAs concept is something that Southwestern Consulting worked with me personally on. And it's hard because there's this tendency, some might call it creative avoidance, some might call it procrastination, but there's this tendency to say, look, I've got all this really important stuff to do. And, I'll get to my calls later. And I have found that the people who spend time on the phone, whether it's a live interaction with someone in person and or on the phone, those are the folks who are the most productive, because all of the other things end up working themselves out. And we do have to return email. We do have to do some administrative stuff. But if you can focus on spending the majority of your day, like you said, 70% of your day doing those income producing activities, everything else is going to work itself out. I was in Nashville actually last week with a sales organization, and they have a rule that either 50 outbound calls and or 2 hours of talk time on the phone is a mandatory daily output. And that's
Love it.
Yeah, it's awesome. And that's the lead indicator, right? So there's lead and lag indicators. Most people think about lag indicators. I want to make $30 million worth of sales this year, or $60 million worth of sales, or I want to make $500,000 of gross commission income, or whatever your goals are. But most people don't know how to get there. And the way you get there is by focusing on those lead indicators and or those income producing activities. And I think that that's really, really important. So your turn it up a notch message that I've personally witnessed in a live presentation and then heard literally dozens of times afterwards is so positive. And I know that people can't necessarily hear it in full length right here on the podcast, but I just got to know, does that come naturally to you? Is it a learned skill, or maybe both, that positivity and that motivational edge? Have you always been that way?
Oh, I always tell people that there's a thing called the learning triangle. And if you imagined a triangle with 4 lines in it going left to right, so there'd be 5 equal parts. And when you're learning something, the bottom part, the thickest part of the triangle that has the most space in it, would be willing to be impacted. So I definitely think that I'm coachable. Like, I've been hungry for self-help. Little did I know 12 years ago when we started our company, I would get paid and be the co-founder of a company that has nearly 200 people now, to actually do self-help for people and help them get to that next level in their personal life and their business. But I think I've always been hungry. Any coaching session, any seminar I could go see in the day, seeing Zig Ziglar and Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy and all the different key speakers, I was hungry for that, and I sat in the front row. Like, and there's a lot of truth to the closer you sit when you see a speaker, you do take it in more. And then if you go up the triangle, you have repetition next. Repetition, and it takes 21 plus or minus 2 days to form a habit. So I've always, if I've learned something that's stuck with me, that I can't just do a quick little fix and then the LODI takes place, law of diminishing intent. You start getting away from the action, you're less likely to do it. And so I think I've been blessed to if I learned something, I actually was good at taking notes and then executing on it. But I would say nobody's born a salesperson. Nobody's born a speaker. Nobody is born to be enthusiastic and excited. It's not like you popped out of your mom's womb and the nurse goes, "Oh, look at that cute little 8-pound closer. How cute!" That doesn't happen. You got to work at it, and I believe that I am consistently, because I wrote about it. It's in my book. It's who I am. That when you are excited and enthusiastic, enthusiasm sells. and there's 2 different ways to look at it. You don't have to be like the highest level and like spaz case, because that will scare people away, but you can have that inner enthusiasm that people can see. You know what I mean? And there's something about you. I can't put my finger on it, but I like it. That's that enthusiasm and excitement that I'm blessed to have. But I'm working at it. I'm a human being. I've had things happen in my life. I trust me, all of us have. And I just, I think because of it, I have what I call a huge BBF. And BBF to me stands for bounce back fast, or bounce back factor. And I believe in business, and all the people that are listening to the show, that if you can work on your excitement and enthusiasm, and act enthusiastic and become enthusiastic, and put yourself around the right people, and smile so big you can eat a banana sideways, let me tell you, it works. Okay, like when you do that, it will help you have a better BBF, so that when you do have things that happen to you, and they will, you're gonna bounce back quicker. It's gonna be better for your clients, better for your family, better for yourself. It's natural.
I love that you went to just something that was it seems like simple and almost could be pedestrian. The idea of being a front row sitter, where you position yourself as you're taking in content that someone else would be demonstrating from the stage or the platform. And personal experience, I failed out of college, but then had the ability to still graduate in 4 years. And one of the things I modified was I stopped sitting in the back row and I started sitting in the front row. I learned that I actually needed glasses at one point, which is a side note. But what ends up happening a lot of times is I think that you are intentional by sitting in the front, and that front row sitting mentality is really, it's so simple, but it's very important. And I think the best leaders are learners. The best leaders end up being readers as well. And those are two things that I focus on a lot. I say to my podcast audience that I'm learning along with them. The reason I ask questions is because I have a heart for learning and for realizing that I don't have it all figured out. And there are other professionals out there that have been there, done that, and have things to share that I've never heard of before. So I love the fact that you're an author. That makes you an authority in a subject. And the fact that you're a presenter, you've observed that the people who are going to end up being the most successful are those who are sit up in the front and are enthusiastic and have passion for learning. So I love it. So what motivated you to write a book? It's something that I have committed to, and it's hard. And most importantly, how did you finish it? Because I think there's a lot of people out there that feel like they've got a book inside of them. And Southwestern, at the heart of Southwestern, is books. It's selling books, but it's education. And it's making people have the ability to learn more. And Southwestern originally started, from the history that I know, as selling Bibles door to door in the 1800s. And so talk about the learning experience of being an author and just what that's like, and what motivated you to write and also finish a book. Because a lot of people have that on their bucket list.
So people always ask me, how are you, like, you're always number one, you're top, your team's the top, your sales are the top. And I didn't think like I was trying to be number one. Honestly, I've always been competing with myself more. What can I do to break the record? What can I do to get better? I remember that in 2000, my stepfather passed away. And as an honor to my mother and my stepfather, I said, I'm going to break $1 million in sales. And in the school fundraising business at the time, I had the record. I was doing about 630,000 was my best year. And that was the best in the industry too. So to even say I'm going to go for $1 million was it was a stretch. But I figured, you know what, if you take a risk and you don't quite hit it, you'll probably still do better than you would have done before. And I've always said, one of my best keynotes I've done is set high goals, don't be afraid to fail. And the reason it is because if you fail, nobody truly cares. Your buddies will still hang out with you if they're true friends. Your significant other and your kids are still going to be there. And people will respect you more for putting it out there and taking a risk. Now, if you do it with humbleness and confidence, and not cocky, that's of course an important part of it. So I went for the $1 million, and this is back in the day where you didn't really have the cell phones and things, the technology that we have today. And I remember every Sunday going to the library and making my list. I hired 2 telemarketers. I'd work late. I'd get up Saturday morning and work. I did what it took to do it. On the very last day, I faxed in, that word fax, I don't even use that anymore, but faxed in a candy bar order, no joke, and hit $1,006,000. It was a big deal in our company. They actually made a Wheaties box for me with my name on it. It was pretty cool. And I got a big bonus that I didn't expect. And people kind of wanted to know my story, although that's not what my book is about. They want to know my story about, like, gosh, how do you have this in you to do stuff like this? And so I had been with the company at that point several years and 13 years. And I'm an A-type personality, and I was getting a little bit bored, and I would do keynote speaking at schools, and I'd have the principal come up or a teacher come up and say, hey, do you ever work like at Apple or other companies besides what you do? Because would you like to work with adults besides children? And I go, I'd love to, but I also have integrity, and I wasn't going to moonlight on the side unless I let my parent company know what I was doing. And I did, and they said as long as I kind of kept it to myself, and I did several gigs, sometimes even on the weekend or where I could, so it didn't affect my sales, so my sales still went up. But I fell in love with the training business. I fell in love with speaking and helping people to achieve their goals. I get just as much joy out of helping someone else get their goals than me hit my goals. I really do to this day. And so they last 3 years, they brought me in to start doing internal training in our company. And during that time is when I started my book. And my thoughts were, eventually I'm going to leave, and I'm going to start my own speaking and training company. And I'm going to do real estate on the side to support it financially. And when I told the company that I was going to leave, they said, we'd like to financially back you to build the very best sales training and leadership training consultancy in the world. And it was a big change, of course, for me. Here we are now, triple digit growth the last 3 years. I've spoken to 1.4 million people in my life. I have a national radio show. I mean, the whole thing is, written 2 books. I'm blessed to work with huge companies. I mean, like I said, Ben & Jerry's, Bellagio, Cirque du Soleil, the 49ers. I can go on and on and on what I've gotten to do. But the books started it. And it was just sitting down and mind mapping. Literally, if you guys don't know what mind map is, it's just in the middle of it was, what did I take to be successful, and start drawing lines off that to have little circles all the way around this piece of paper. And then I was taping other pieces of paper to that paper because my mind map got bigger and bigger and bigger. And mentally, I quit. And I hit a stumbling block because I just had never written a book before. And I had an opportunity to buy a ghost written book. And it was a big mistake that I never would do again. And spent $5,000 thinking, oh, they'd have the book written for me. I just add a few things to it. And a lot of books are written that way, by the way. But in reality, it wasn't integrity. It wasn't right. I made a big mistake. I look back at it and go, that was stupid. And I got it. And I never even spent more than a week on it, and went back to that book that was in my head, in my heart, and finished my mind map. And I've redone it once. It's been kind of my calling card. It hasn't been where I've made millions of dollars, but it's definitely credibility. And that's when you're a speaker, that's important to people, that you have stories and that you've been there and you've done that. And so the other thing I did is, for about a month, I focused on it for a month. Like, anytime I wasn't working, that was my book. I always tell people that when they say they don't have time, that if the average person works 8 hours a day and the average person sleeps 8 hours a day, that means that 5 days a week, you have 8 hours of discretionary time. And if you're working 0 on the weekend, but you're sleeping 8 hours a day, that means you have 16 hours on each of your weekend days of discretionary time. So when people say they don't have time to do something that they really want, I have a real hard time with that. I challenge them in a loving way, of course, unless they give me permission to hold them accountable. I can be loving, but I can be a little harder on them, but that's what some people need. Even if of those 72 hours, part of it was, eating and spending time with your family, you could probably do that in 22 hours. Probably. You still got 50 hours a week to focus on what you really want. So that's what I did. And I got my book written in a month, and then worked with an editor and all the process to take it all the way through.
There's 2 follow-up thoughts that I have to that whole process, because you're right. And for someone like myself, it's a great reminder. It's a great piece of just motivation and inspiration that I can do it. You did it. Other people have done it. But the two pieces of information that I'd like to share is that, number one, our first guest ever on the podcast is an author named Karen Briscoe. And she wrote basically a daily devotional that has sales strategies for realtors. It's 365 different things that she's taken over her life, lessons that she's learned. And it basically just gives you a script of things you should be doing, prospecting different things. And so she mentioned that she just simply got up 1 hour early every day and wrote during that morning time. Some people do it in the evening, whatever period of time it is for you to have that free time. And she wrote the book. She had the outline written. So that was item number one. She figured out a way to do it. Item number two was one of my favorite podcasts is by the author of The Business Boutique, Christy Wright. And Christy shares often that there's a study out there that the average American watches 3 to 5 hours of television a day.
I know.
A day. Of that 8 hours that you're not at work and the 8 hours that you're not sleeping, 3 to 5 hours of it. And it's elusive. And I'll share my own personal story with this. It's 20 minutes of catching ESPN in the morning, or like my wife, Courtney, she wants to watch, the Today Show for 20 or 30 minutes, or you're doing it while you're getting ready. And then all of a sudden you've got your favorite sitcom, or you're big into whatever the latest drama is on TV or HBO or whatever. And all of a sudden you add it up and you're like, gee golly, 2 hours or 3 hours I watched TV today. And it's you're watching someone else's life instead of living your own. And so that's great inspiration for us. So what happens to the top producer, and most of the people who listen to this podcast are top producers. There's some folks who are learning and want to understand business and understand the real estate best practices, but there's a lot of people who've been there, done that. And I think for those folks, they're overscheduled, they're overwhelmed, they've got a lot of stuff going on. And so what happens for them is I think it's priority dilution. And I think that what ends up happening is those folks just don't realize how much time they actually do have. If they were to give those things that they think they have to do, and they're the only person that could do it, if they compartmentalize that and delegate it properly to someone that wants to do that type of work for them, and that isn't the rainmaker or the key salesperson in the industry. So for that top producer, though, they may have an opportunity to write. They may have an opportunity to speak. And it's something that's happened to myself. Every now and again, I get people saying, hey, you've gotten a couple of really cool awards, both locally and nationally. Speak to us. What in the world should we talk about? You've been a trainer. You've spoken to over 1 million people, like you said. What do you do to get yourself prepared to do a killer keynote, or even just a great 15 or 20 minute discussion in front of a group of people? I'd love to hear some suggestions.
Well, first of all, you got to, for a second, slow down, back up a little bit, and think, what is the outcome that whoever wanted you to speak, what's the outcome that they want? Because just because let's say you can speak to a local real estate association, right? Or you could speak at the chamber, or you can speak at BNI, even a smaller type of group, whatever it is. It's really important that you know what the ultimate outcome is. And so when I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I will have a conversation, and I will offer to, and even the clients that I get as training clients, before I start working with them the first time, and I won't do it unless I've had some time to interview their people. I do shadow days, if at all possible, where I literally will go out in the field. I just started working with a new client called iTrip, which is property management company. They're amazing, by the way. If you guys ever heard of them, they're based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and they do short-term property rental. And just started an engagement with them. I spent 2 days last week in Nashville with their executives, just picking their brain and learning their business. Then I'm going October 25th to Portland to travel with one of their top people for a day to see a day in the life of, so that when we actually start the engagement of the training, the engagement of the speaking, which will be a series of webinars and in-person speaking at their national conference, and then also speaking at 3 regional meetings, they know that I know them. Okay, they know that I care about them. That expression that Zig used to say, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, is huge. And for many people, it's funny, you go to a keynote speaking event and there's people in the front row, like we talked about, but there's also people that are sitting there with their arms folded and like, who the heck are you? It's like, I'm not in the mood today to hear what you have to say. And so it is absolutely huge to be able to train, coach, speak and come from the perspective of, I know what they do. I know what's important to them. And then be able to take your skill set or whatever it is and weave it into it.
Gareth, I think that's gold. And I think it comes back to what you were talking about at the very beginning of our discussion. It's all about building rapport, which comes from a place of asking questions and being inquisitive. And so you're sitting there saying, what does my audience want to hear? Why did you ask, to have me present to you in the first place? And I think that's a great message for young speakers or people who are working on that craft that may still continue to be producers in the real estate industry, but may have people that, whether it's a board of realtors or an NAR event or whatever it is, that they know that you're an expert, but you're also making sure you're communicating based on the person that hired you or even just asked you to speak if it's a free gig. So I think that's great advice. I could tell in several points of our interview that you've had a couple of mentors. You've had a couple of people, whether they're famous or maybe not so famous, that have influenced you in your craft. And so I've got to know, I heard you talk about Zig Ziglar, and I heard you talk about Brian Tracy and Brian Buffini, but are there some people that have really marked kind of Gary Michael's journey as a motivational speaker, as a professional trainer, and as an author?
Yeah. Well, Tom Hopkins, who is somebody that I would go see all the time, was someone that really struck a chord with me because he does a couple speeches a year. His leadership speaker, Ron Marks, is now in our company. And actually I'm Ron's leader and I get to work with Ron every day. We built a great friendship. So I've known Tom for a very long time, and he always said, you mentor with people you want to be like. So I actually got him to, and it was a long story that would take more than this radio show, but he actually was my mentor for a period of time and made so many suggestions to me of how I could make it in the speaker role. Because my goal today still is, I want to be the best motivational speaker, sales trainer in the world. And there's not really a category for that, quite honestly. I made it myself, but I want to continue to be a speaker that can train people how to be the very best they can be in sales, but also be motivational and inspirational and touch on their whole life, not just their sales skills, because you really are a product of who you are in your entire life, and it will affect you if things aren't good at your home life. I always say, does it match what happens at the boardroom table matches at the kitchen table? And so Tom McDowell is another one. Tom McDowell he's retired now, the president of Great American, where I spent 19 years in the school fundraising business. And Tom was like a second father to me. My dad is a little more driver, loud, outspoken. Tom was the conservative, speak slow, give me the boundaries, keep me in line, called me out on my stuff. And it was good to have someone in business that took that role. And then, I've been in a lot of courses over my life too, because I think sometimes you could be inspired and motivated by people, but I also think you can be inspired and motivated and driven by a course you took or a program that you were in. And I'm constantly always be learning. And I went through a program in Las Vegas called Choice Center Las Vegas. And to me, I had gone through Landmark Forum before. This is, to me, it's like Landmark Forum on steroids. And it was a time in my life when I was going through some things, and it was you go one weekend for discovery, a Thursday to Sunday, and basically it gets to the deep inner core of who you are as a person. And then you go back 2 weeks later and it's breakthrough. And then there's a 3-month leadership program after that. And it was the deepest looking inside out at who I am as a person so that I can be better in all areas of my life. And so often I still make mistakes and I still have weak moments like we all do. And I look back to what I learned in Choice that really helped me. And so those are probably my 3 people and things that have touched my heart a lot.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that I picked out of that answer was that you shared your objective, your big purpose, your goal of being the best speaker, being the number one. And it's kind of hard to quantify that, right? But I just went through a training where the leadership group was saying that as you're creating a mission and a vision for the company that you operate, it should be so big that it should almost scare you. Jim Collins talks about a big, hairy, audacious goal.
Yeah.
But your mission should be so all-encompassing, so altruistic that if you accomplish it, you should be able to close the doors of your company and know you've done a good, solid work. And the answer is it should never be done. The work should never be done. And I think that's constant striving and achieving. And you've got benchmarks along the way that let you know that you're getting better and better at it. But I love that you share that it's okay to say, I want to be the number one realtor in my territory or in my board of realtors, and then in the entire state, and then in the entire US, and then. And the whole idea is that you've got this constant growth mindset and this constant willingness to grow and learn and improve. And I think that's great. We have just a little bit of time left. And with a lot of my guests, I feel like, gosh, we could do this for 2 hours. But my last two questions, and you touched a little bit on this, and I want to kind of dive deep, but adversity is a subject I talk about a lot. It's not something we prepared for, but I can tell there's been some moments in your life where you've dealt with some adversity and you've dealt with some tough times. And that ties into the last question. My favorite question to ask is this idea of dear younger me, writing a letter to yourself or someone else that's younger. What's the advice you wish you knew when you were 22? So those two topics of, kind of failure that may have said to you, hey, I need to pivot and go somewhere else in my life. And then also a lot of times we wish we could have avoided that, but we have to learn by getting our hand burned by putting it on the stove. So, just what are some things that you have learned along your successful career?
I think the idea of self-talk and the importance of self-talk, and that I did not know about it till maybe I was 35, about really how important it was. And self-talk heals, and self-talk is like the vitamin to when you have stuff happening to you in your life. And now one of my biggest keynotes, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, called Millionaire Mindset, and I've done it like 500 times for companies and individuals, and it's talking about self-talk and affirmations and what's important to you. But I didn't have that. And so I made some decisions in marriage. I made some decisions in business that I settled because I emotionally beat myself up and didn't have the self-talk to talk myself through of you can do this. Because when you have negative self-talk, you have a poor self-esteem. You have a poor self-esteem. You have poor activities, and when you have bad activities, you get bad results. So even though to the outside world, I was killing it, making money, top salesperson, inside I was hurting because there were things that weren't necessarily what I wanted to be. So I would say, I wish I would have known that, and that would have caused me to have been more servant-minded and have more connection with people. And to this day, I think it's one of my best strengths is that I'm very much able to connect with all my clients. It sounds crazy, but all my consulting clients that I work with, and a consulting client for us is someone that does somewhere 3 months to a year to 2 years where they're working with you on a regular basis. Every one of them, the owner has become my friend too. And I know that's weird. I know it's a weird thing because there's a definite line between respect and this is a client, but a friend. And I think that's because I take the time now, and it's a skill set that I've been able to massage over the years to really get to know that person. And when you do that, you're gonna get to know that person. That company's gonna help their company. They're gonna be more trusting of you, right? And I wish I would have done that sooner, but you know what? You have to fail. Yeah, you have to fail to succeed. And I've had my failures. Trust me, I've had my failures.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And the reason why I named my company and this podcast, two separate things, but related to me, the reason I named it Calibrate is that Calibrate is all about thinking of life like a scientist. Scientists calibrate tools and experiments all the time, and they don't wear that failure. They don't take it personally. Mm-hmm. A great quote, and it's been attributed to a lot of different people, is that, failure is an event. It's not a person. It should be studied. It should be observed. How can we figure this out for a better result next time? And that Calibrate's all about that. It's all about iteration. So I love that you shared that. And I really appreciate that you said, for 13 years, you didn't know how to positively speak to yourself. I deal with that to this day. And so, I've seen you do a presentation about some of your positive affirmations. I've heard some of the training around I can, I will, I'm going to. If you got just a couple of quick suggestions for someone that's struggling with that negative self-talk, or the term that I love that goes around Southwestern Consulting is Mr. Mediocrity, that little guy that sits on your shoulder. You know, if you can talk to that person that's dealing with that negativity, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, what doesn't get calendared doesn't get done. So if you're listening to this today and you're saying, you know, I need to have better self-talk, I want you to switch that mentality of need to, have to, that's heavy lifting, that's like a brick, to I want to have better self-talk. And the reason you want to have better self-talk is because if you have positive self-talk, your esteem goes up, and you have a bounce in your step, and you look in your eye, and you're attractive for people to be around, and your activity goes up. And I get excited just talking about this, but your activity is the right activity. You're doing the right things when you're supposed to do the right things, and all of your results come. So calendar time to say this afternoon, take action now. I'm going to, or whenever you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to go ahead and write some affirmations. And I may not even know exactly how to write them yet. There's a lot of stuff online. Okay, you can contact our company if you want. They're written usually in the I am an absolute rockin' producer. I can, I will, I'm going to. Don't talk about things you will or you're going to do, but you talk in the I am. And then I always tell people to calendar in on their calendar to read their affirmations 4 to 6 times a day. I make a real strong effort to read them out loud, 8, 10, 12, 2, 4, and 6. Now, if I have an appointment at 10 o'clock, then I'll read them at 9:55, you know, but there's something about it's that vitamin, it's the nourishment that goes into your head, so input can equal output. And it's free. That's a good thing, right? People like things that are free, don't cost you any money. It just takes the time. And it's going to be one of those things, again, guys, if you do this, people go, there's something different about you. And if you can give yourself the gift of affirmations, it's huge.
I love it. I appreciate that you taught on that for just a moment. And as we close our show, I'd be remiss if I didn't share my own personal testimony of just how Southwestern Consulting has impacted me in my life. And we can go into it at length. We won't, but I have had the opportunity to meet so many people in your organization, and this is real. You train leaders, whether you're in sales or management or leadership. The consulting that your team does is incredible. And I bless you. Thank you very much for starting the company and for having the willingness to do it, because you've impacted so many lives. Think about all the clients that I have or other people have, and you're a positive beacon out there in the marketplace. So if someone's interested in Southwestern Consulting, how do they get, a demo, or how do they find out more about getting a coach? And what does it look like for someone who's not familiar with Southwestern Consulting?
Well, first of all, one thing that all of our senior partners, co-founders, everybody in our company, we're not just in the chair, the top floor. Like, we're out there every day making sales calls and leading and training. So you literally would reach out to me. I'm the co-founder, but guess what? I'm a person just like you guys are. And you can reach me on my cell at 408-888-4848. I'll say that again, 408-888-4848. Or you can email me at gmichels, Michels, at southwesternconsulting.com. And we always do a test drive, shall we say. We let people see our work before they actually hire us. And just the same way we work with clients and we're going to interview them and shadow them, we want to make sure that people enjoy what we do. So many times a week, I'll be doing a Zoom meeting with somebody and going through our website, talking about their business, their individual situation, and seeing what's best for them. So if it's an individual contributor, it would be walking them through coaching. If it's a leader, it could be working through training, consulting, writing scripts for them, maybe taking a look at what their processes and systems are and how do we make them better. But I can tell you this, that one thing that we're very proud of at Southwestern Consulting, and the number's higher now, but a couple of years ago when we actually looked at it, our average client that does some sort of ongoing program with us sees a 23% lift over plan or prior. Many see much, much more. But so for the people that are a little scared, a little afraid to test it out, people never go backwards. They only grow. So I'd love to, anybody that listen to the podcast, I'd love to meet you. Text me, email me, call me, and I'll, I want to hear about you first, because it may or may not be a fit. But if there's something we can do, that would be part of my dream and our company's dream, and that's to help other people get what they want. That's our mantra.
I love it. You know, there's so many people out there that think that this stuff is too good to be true. And for someone who co-founded a company, and hopefully I've built rapport with my audience enough to tell you that this is a big company. I've been to their offices on Atrium Way in Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, this is legit. And Gary just gave you his cell phone number and his personal email. Doesn't happen a whole lot. And I'll tell you, if you're an online researcher, southwesternconsulting.com is a great place to also learn about it. They have a podcast too. And Gary's going to be venturing into that part of the world as well. You've had a national radio show that you're going to transition into a podcast. So we're excited to see all the things that you've got up ahead of you, Gary. This has been, at the time has flown. This has been so much fun. And I'll tell you what, Southwestern Consulting has taken me from a individual solo lone wolf, lone ranger agent to a top producer to a partner in another company to now owning my own brokerage firm that is growing and growing rapidly. And there's so many things that I've learned from your organization. So thank you. And as I love to say for all of our listeners and watchers out there, whether you're on Apple, iTunes, or YouTube, Gary Michels and I, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care, guys.